Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about my Week 15 running back starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about some news around the National Football League as it pertains to fantasy football. Then we're going to be going over the matchups at the running back position, then going over my top 36 running back rankings. Yes, it's Week 15. It's the second round of the fantasy football playoffs. Maybe some of you playing a Week 17 championship. Maybe it's the first round of your playoffs. But for those of you who had a bye week last week, it's time to get back to work. Time to pick up some players. Time to start the right people and try to pick up a win in Week 15 so we can get to our fantasy football championships next week. Before we begin, let me remind all of you, if you have not yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community. Also, click that bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. Try to help us get to that 13,000 subscriber mark. Really do appreciate everyone's support. And if you like today's video, don't forget to click the like button. Hey everybody, how's it going? Hope everyone's doing well. All right, so let's talk about news. Let's talk about Monday Night Football. Let's talk about some injuries. Yesterday we talked about injuries for a pretty long time in the beginning of the video, but there are more injuries to be stated, and they're pretty relevant. Number one, Marvin Jones out for the season with an ankle injury. He is being sent to the injured reserve. That is very unfortunate considering he was having another good season. Last year, the ACL injury was unfortunate, but the year prior, the dude was a top 12 wide receiver in a half PPR scoring format, and he was pretty much on pace for that this year as well. Unfortunately, the injury will take him to the IR, but that's pretty much been the season for the Detroit Lions for the last couple of years. Injuries, an injury-ridden offense has been really their biggest plague. With Kerryon Johnson and Matthew Stafford both being injured this year, Marvin Jones is the next victim in that offense. But Kenny Golladay. It could be a really good play in the coming weeks. Maybe even Danny Amendola, because he did see a good amount of targets last week. We might see some more production from him. Moving on, Auden Tate, wide receiver for the Bengals. He is out for the season. He is going to the IR. It's kind of helpful for Tyler Boyd, but he really has always been the only wide receiver there since AJ Green has not come back. So Tyler Boyd still another good play. Outside of that, Alshon Jeffrey, many of you know on yesterday's game, he did not play a single snap while getting out of one of his breaks. The dude, injured, went to the locker room, didn't come back. He's out for the season. It's unfortunate, but that's just the case that we're dealing with. Let's talk about some Thursday night football before we get into Monday. This coming Thursday, we have the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore playing against the New York Jets. A couple players in that kind of matchup that we want to be concerned about or potentially safe in playing. Lamar Jackson dealing with a hamstring issue as of right now. During Tuesday's warm-ups and workouts, he was perfectly fine. He should be good to go this Thursday. No issue there. Jamal Adams on the other side of the ball, the safety for the New York Jets. He did miss the game against the Miami Dolphins this past week in Week 14, but he should be making his return, and so shall Le'Veon Bell. With the illness and the injury to Bilal Powell, hopefully Le'Veon Bell is good to go. I've heard reports that Le'Veon Bell might be traded this coming season. That's what we knew before this season even began. I don't know why people are reporting it now, but we all know that Adam Gase didn't want him on this offense and still doesn't want him there. Hopefully he can at least have a good Week 15 or at least, finish the season strong so that people, are more enticed to try to pick up that contract. Maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers go back and pick up Le'Veon. We'll see what happens there. Outside of that, in terms of news, that's pretty much it. Oh, also, the last piece of news that I wanted to mention in terms of injury, it's been confirmed Mike Evans will miss Weeks 15 to 17. That is pretty much he's out for season. So I don't know why that was reported in that specific wording or context, but he's out for the rest of the season with that hamstring injury. Didn't look good and is continuously probably not going to be a good thing for him. So hopefully he gets back healthy whenever he does. But as of right now, those were the injuries that took place. Let's talk about Monday Night Football. It was kind of a interesting Monday night. We saw Eli Manning and the Giants dominating the first half while the Carson Wentz led Eagles with a bunch of injuries, Lane Johnson getting carted off, and Alshon Jeffrey have a kind of a role reversal in terms of how good the Giants were in the second half and how bad the Eagles were, and then the opposite, how the Eagles mounted a comeback and even in overtime got it done against a Giants team that is on quite the skid, to be honest. So we'll see how this kind of transpires with Eli at quarterback. Perhaps he plays this coming week against the Miami Dolphins. I'd like to see that. Two older gentlemen playing against Eli versus Ryan Fitzpatrick. That'd be kind of cool. We'll see how that goes. But I'm assuming that Daniel Jones is probably not going to be healthy like we were talking about yesterday. But outside of that, a couple waiver wire targets that you might want to consider going after. Obviously, Darius Slayton, we talked about him weeks ago. And his matchups continue to get easier. He plays against the Miami Dolphins this coming week. And then the following week plays against the Washington Redskins. doesn't get as easy as that. I honestly believe Darius Slayton. I mean, I thought Sterling Shepard would be the guy to have the pop-off game. Slayton just ran past the DBs as they completely just, I don't know, they don't even know what they're doing out there sometimes. But regardless, Slayton had a monster game, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's fantastic. Could pick him up this week as another wide receiver option. And then on the other side of the ball, we saw another running back option kind of present himself. Boston Scott, who I honestly was under the impression that he was like a third-string running back for the Saints. Maybe that was just last year. But as of right now, Boston Scott came out yesterday and had a 128-yard performance against the New York Giants, while Miles Sanders had just more rushing attempts on the ground total. But Boston Scott worked in the passing game, had himself a rushing touchdown on the goal line. And it looks to me like this Miles Sanders experiment is kind of becoming less and less of an experiment, more of a timeshare and a RBBC, like Doug Peterson typically likes to run. So is it a surprise? No. But did it come and hit us at the wrong time? Yes. For a lot of you who needed Miles Sanders to step up and have a monster week in week 14, maybe it didn't happen. And, Boston Scott came in and he definitely put his hat in, or his name in the hat, for a potential job in the future and potential touches in the coming weeks. All right, so that's all the news that I wanted to go over. Let's go over some matchups going into week 15 of the fantasy football season. As we all know, a lot of these teams give up a lot of points to opposing running backs on a weekly basis. Starting off with the Carolina Panthers, Chris Carson should have a monster week this week. I mean, just going back and looking at what Devonta Freeman and a guy like Brian Hill did last week. Devonta Freeman went for like 17 carries, 74 yards, and a touchdown, while Brian Hill went for like 962 and 1. They both had fantastic games, and that's not the only people that have gone off against them. The week before, we had, I got to refresh myself. The Carolina Panthers, they played against the Washington Redskins, and we remember seeing Darius Geis and Adrian Peterson go for 23 carries, both of them combined for a total of 3 touchdowns and over 220 rushing yards. I think Chris Carson, without Rashad Penny, he's going to dominate. He's going to run all over this Panthers defense. The Kansas City Chiefs, yes, the Broncos have an opportunity to run on them, but we have to remember, last time these teams played, it was in Denver, and they couldn't run the ball. They blitzed Joe Flacco. They made it impossible for them to get out of the backfield, and I think that's what they're going to probably try to do this week against a guy like Drew Lock. Blitz him, stop the run, and force this rookie to try to make plays under pressure. And I think they could probably get after that. The Jacksonville Jaguars, as we all know, the Jacksonville Jaguars give up a bunch of points to opposing running backs on a weekly basis. In the last couple weeks, it has been absolutely insane what they have given up. We'll talk about it a little bit more with the Raiders matchup this coming week and who's going to potentially start there. But as of right now, just looking at what the Los Angeles Chargers did last week, even Derek Watt, the fullback, had a rushing touchdown. Gordon was good overall, 16.9 fantasy points. Austin Ekeler, though, on 12 touches, had 213 total yards. There's a reason why he's on the thumbnail, because Austin Ekeler fired out of that cannon into the end zone, had a huge place and big contribution. And it's not a surprise because each of the last 5 weeks, there's been a 100-plus yard rusher against this defense. And it's not stopping. And hopefully the Oakland Raiders, hopefully Josh Jacobs can be healthy enough to do it. But if not, there's going to be another guy like DeAndre Washington potentially, vying for that opportunity. Then we have ourselves a couple better matchups. The Green Bay Packers always giving up a lot of points on the ground. The Detroit Lions, if in fact, maybe Ronald Jones or Peyton Barber want to wake up this week. And then we have ourselves, the Miami Dolphins taking on Saquon. Saquon hasn't been himself this year, but hopefully the Miami matchup will kind of help him out. Then we have ourselves the Houston Texans. Derrick Henry's coming to town, and it's not going to be fun for you guys. The Cincinnati Bengals with the New England Patriots. There's a couple, okay, so obviously Cincinnati Bengals give a lot of points. Tony Michel doesn't exist. It's James White, so that's fine. But Patriots, Cincinnati, there's a lot of talking points for that. There's a lot of news going around where the Patriots were filming the sideline and all the signs, and they're going to be stealing signs. We'll see where that goes. Regardless, we're talking about fantasy at this point. Let's talk about the Oakland Raiders, the Washington Redskins, Arizona Cardinals, Los Angeles Chargers, all of them giving up a lot of points on the ground to opposing running backs, and it hasn't really been slowing down as of late, so it should continue. Again, Washington, Aaron Jones went off against them. The Arizona Cardinals, even though they stopped Benny Snell and really didn't let them do anything, I think this coming week, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt should be going off. And those are the easier matchups. The tougher matchups, we all know. The Saints, the 49ers, the Buccaneers, and the Patriots, they do not give up anything on the ground. It is not a secret. And that's probably going to stay as So we'll see where that goes as of right now. But until then, let's go ahead and let's talk about my top 36 running back rankings on the week, starting off with my one Mr. Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey didn't score a rushing touchdown each of the last 2 weeks. Sure, his production in terms of points has not been as insane as it was in the first half of the season. But all I can say is that Christian McCaffrey is as good as it gets, whether it's especially in a full PPR. The dude's catching the ball 10 plus times. He is the entire offense of this Carolina Panthers. And to be honest, despite how much they struggled last week, Christian McCaffrey will continue to get it done. He's an incredible running back, and he's going to always be the number one for the rest of the season. Despite, they play against the Seahawks. I'm not really worried about that. I think it's actually a pretty good matchup for him at home. So Christian McCaffrey, you're my number one. Moving on. On the other side of the ball, we have a run-heavy matchup between Christian McCaffrey and Chris Carson. Chris Carson on the other side is going to be playing against, in my opinion, the worst run defense in the National Football League. And in terms of statistics, it's there too. Chris Carson without Rashad Penny. Hopefully you don't fumble, buddy. But, CJ Prosise can't get it done. As of right now, I expect Chris Carson to come out and run all over the Panthers, have the best game of his season in Week 15. And for fantasy owners, try to get you to that championship round. He's my number two. Moving on to number three, Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry's been incredible. I think he scored a touchdown each of the last 6 games. And he scored 2+ in 4 of those games. He is insane. And it's not slowing down, despite even having a hamstring injury. This Tennessee Titans offense looks so different. In terms of what they want to do and what they want to get done, their heart is still there. Their concepts are still there. Run the ball, play action, play good defense, and be efficient in the passing game. They're still there. That core of what they've established in the last couple of years is still there. But they're doing it at a fantastic level. Ryan Fitzpatrick is extremely efficient and looks ridiculously good. You have the running game with the offensive line, who has never been better, and Derrick Henry getting the ball, 20 times a game. I mean, I couldn't ask for anything more. And Derrick Henry is going to probably run all over Houston, as Houston has been awful in terms of defense, especially last week. Couldn't stop Drew Lock to save their life. And going to Tennessee, it's going to be tough to stop Derrick Henry. Moving on. Dalvin Cook's my number 4 as the number 2 fantasy back as of right now. Last week, there's a little bit of concern considering, Alexander Mattison came in and had 14 rushing attempts. Sure, Dalvin Cook had 18 on the ground, but the thing is, Dalvin Cook, if in fact, one of his touchdowns gets stolen, that 14.5-point week turns into an 8-point week, 8.5-point week, and then we're sitting there like, okay, what happened? Where's Dalvin Cook? Where's our 25-point guy? Hopefully this week he can bounce back against the Los Angeles Chargers. I expect him to do so. 2 weeks removed from that shoulder injury, I think he'll be fine. He's my number 4. Moving on to number 5, Ezekiel Elliott. Zeke playing against the Rams. Pretty decent front seven. In terms of defensive line, we know. Double team Aaron Donald, and then singularly block every single other person. So get Zach Martin and Travis Frederick onto Aaron Donald, double team him, let Zeke loose. Zeke last week had 2 touchdowns. If you played him on Thursday night, which I'm sure everybody did who owns him, he started off your week great, because usually Zeke's not a 2-touchdown guy and hasn't been since his rookie year, which is kind of unfortunate, but that's the situation we're in. Now that we've gotten here, Zeke's getting the ball more. Hopefully they want to run the ball more, especially against the Rams this coming week at home. We'll see how this offense looks. We're just going to have to wait and see, but hopefully Zeke's getting his touches. I expect him to be good. He's my number 5 on the week. Moving on, same matchup, Todd Gurley. I expect the Rams, who have looked better in the last couple weeks, to run the ball. Todd Gurley has not looked terrible in the last couple weeks. He's in fact been really good in terms of fantasy in the last couple weeks. And if we go back and we see what exactly the Rams did to the Cowboys just this past offseason or past postseason in the playoff game in LA, they absolutely battered this front seven. And again, that was with Van Der Esch. Van Der Esch is gone. This defense cannot stop a soul in the running game. And I expect the Rams to run all over the Dallas Cowboys this coming week because it's an easy thing to do on the Dallas Cowboys. And as of right now, I expect Todd Gurley to be good. He's my number 6. Moving on to number 7, Leonard Fournette. Fournette takes on the Raiders. The Raiders, one of these defenses that certainly cannot stop many people on the ground. Now, I know Leonard Fournette's been kind of inefficient in terms of his production, or at least fantasy production, because he hasn't gotten as many touches on the ground and or through the air. That's unfortunate. But the Raiders defense, they give up a lot on the ground. I mean, Derrick Henry ran a spin cycle on them. We had, Melvin Gordon just a couple weeks back go off. Mixon had a good week. So Melvin Gordon, 19.8. Mixon, 16.8. We had Le'Veon Bell and LeSean McCoy and Darwin Thompson all go for 10 plus in the last couple weeks. I mean, Leonard Fournette's probably getting 10 plus, and I'm expecting him to have a really big game, like over 100 rushing yards and probably a touchdown. He's my number 7 on the week in a really good matchup, in my opinion. Moving on to number 8, Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones had a very big performance this past week against Washington. Glad to see it because he had been pretty quiet since the bye week. He'd only had a total of 8.8 points since then. Thank goodness the dude came back. Had himself a good performance. The Chicago Bears matchup, not easy. Earlier in the season, everybody struggled in terms of offense in this matchup, but these two offenses have developed. And I think Mitch Trubisky being on fire, being able to score as much as he has, it's going to test the Packers. And I think this is going to be a back-and-forth scoring matchup. And I think Aaron Jones is going to be able to step up against this defense that isn't too great against stopping the run. Moving on, let's talk about number 9, Nick Chubb. I know Nick Chubb wasn't great in fantasy, 12.2 points, but another week in which he rushes for over 100 yards. That is something we cannot take for granted. He is consistently getting it done on the ground, and I expect him to continue to do so. Sure, the touchdown went towards Kareem Hunt each of the last 2 weeks, and that's brutal, and that hurts. But the Cardinals matchup, in my opinion, is far too juicy, and I expect Nick Chubb to have a really big week here. He's my number 9. Moving on to number 10, Saquon Barkley. Again, like I mentioned earlier, Saquon Barkley is not himself. I don't know who is in his body or who's running the ship over there, but Saquon's getting touches. 17, 19, 17 in the last 3 weeks, but has yet to eclipse anything over 84 rushing yards. That's rough. The passing game, not really going in his direction either. Even with Eli at quarterback, we saw Saquon Barkley last year have incredible performances of 13 rushes and over 100 yards, both of the times he played against the Eagles last season. Yet this season, we haven't seen that. And I don't know where Saquon is, but hopefully he shows up in Miami or against Miami this coming week, because fantasy owners, if you're still in the playoffs with a Saquon, with your number 1 pick, congrats, but you need him more now than ever. Moving on to number 11, Raheem Mostert. Raheem Mostert's been incredible. I don't know what else to say other than that. Like, he is the number 1 back in San Francisco, and it's not even close. Now, sure, he didn't have too many touches or rushing attempts last week in comparison to the Baltimore game, but 10 rushing attempts, 69 rushing yards for a touchdown. Got a lot of work in the passing game, which he's always been efficient in. And on top of it, dominated the snap count. 60% of the snaps in that game against New Orleans. Takes on Atlanta this week. Sure, there's going to be some usage of the other running backs here and there, and it's a very average, below average run defense. But I think Raheem Mostert is a guy that's just going to continue to get it done. 13 plus points in each of the last 3 weeks. Scoring rushing touchdowns makes a huge difference. But that work in the passing game, that is also a big difference maker, and it's definitely helping out Mostert as of late. Moving on. Number 12, we have DeAndre Washington. Now you may be thinking, Andrew, what the heck? DeAndre Washington at 12? This is a placeholder for Josh Jacobs. If Josh Jacobs is ready to go, the dude is a top 5 back against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Absolutely. The Jacksonville Jaguars cannot stop a soul. We talked about it earlier when we talked about matchups, how many points they've given up. But if DeAndre Washington is the back here, and he's going to play like he did this past Sunday against Tennessee, who's a pretty good run-stopping defense, taking on another AFC South contributor or team, I don't know what you want to call them. They're not really a team. They're just somebody that gets bopped every week. That's the Jaguars for you. DeAndre Washington can really be a huge performer and a guy that I'm confident enough picking up and putting in my flex automatically. And playing him over just about anybody else, that we talk about later in this video. Because I really do believe if he is the starting running back and he's getting as many touches and he's going to catch the ball 7 times in the passing game, the Jacksonville Jaguars matchup at home seems to me like it's probably a good matchup for DeAndre Washington and or Josh Jacobs. Either way, that's why I have Washington at 12. Moving on, talk about my RB2s this week. Starting off with number 13, Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon was decent. Sure, Austin Ekeler kind of overshadowed his performance with that humongous... I don't even understand how Austin Ekeler gets it done. But he does, and there's a reason Austin Ekeler is a top, 5 back in half PPR. Regardless, Melvin Gordon still got his work, still got his touches on the ground, still scored a rushing touchdown. Beautiful, perfectly fine. This week takes on the Vikings. The Vikings have been good against the run. We saw them get exposed a couple weeks back against a team like the Seahawks have a very good running offense with Carson and Penny. And I'm expecting Melvin Gordon to still be productive. So despite Austin Ekeler, his contributions, his insane efficiency, I expect Melvin Gordon to still be good. He's my number 13. Moving on to number 14, Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary is it's almost hard to explain how good Devin Singletary is. No matter the matchup, he played against the Ravens last week, still put up 15 fantasy points. Still had 89 rushing yards on 17 carries. Still got a lot of work in the passing game. The dude is a double-digit scoring monster. And this week plays against Pittsburgh, another tough defense. But am I worried about it? Not really. I've gotten to the point where I'm fully confident in a guy like Devin Singletary just always being good. And that's what I'm expecting. And as next year, looking forward, when Frank Gore's gone, Devin Singletary is going to be the monster that is just going to dominate this division and should be a pretty good player. So this week, I have a number 14, pretty confident in Devin Singletary. Moving on to 15, we have Austin Ekeler, like we were talking about just a minute ago, is the number 5 back right now in fantasy. And a lot of that has to do with his 11 touchdowns, 8 coming through the air. That being said, his performance was crazy, but it's not like it's out of the ordinary. In the last 5 weeks, his production fantasy, 11.3, 8.8, 11.3, 11.8, 17.2, 14.7. Gets good touches on the ground. Sure, is not extremely productive in a lot of the matchups, but gets it done through the air every single week in a PPR, half PPR format. And just this last week, just leads me to believe that this guy is just going to continue to get it done. He is a 10-plus point guy, and he will always have the upside of that touchdown, which is absolutely beautiful, so should be good to go. Moving on, we have ourselves my number 16 running back on the week, Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram is kind of disappointing to an extent. Mark Ingram is still a top 12 back, still has himself 12 touchdowns in a matter of 13 weeks, but we're missing that explosive play. We're missing those touchdowns, to be honest. Yes, he gets a lot of work in the passing game, a lot more than I expected him to get earlier this season. But again, he's getting his touches. Each of the last 3 weeks, 15 rushing attempts, which is absolutely beautiful. But we need to see a rushing touchdown. Hopefully this Thursday against the Jets, we find that. Mark Ingram is my number 16. Talking about the Jets, I didn't do this on purpose, but Le'Veon Bell, you are number 17. My concern with Le'Veon Bell pretty much surrounds the entire Jets offense. I don't know what to expect from this Jets offense because this Ravens defense is really good. But if Le'Veon Bell, because of the inconsistencies of a guy like Jamison Crowder, because Ryan Griffin doesn't show up and Robbie Anderson is getting locked down by a Marcus Peters or a Humphreys or double covered by Earl Thomas over the top or something of that nature, there's always a possibility that Le'Veon Bell is just catching all the passes out of the backfield. He's familiar with playing against the defense like the Ravens, doing so much for the Steelers those years past. I feel confident in Le'Veon Bell. I think he can get it done through the air and at least find himself a safe value. That's why I have him at 17. Moving on, we have Alvin Kamara, number 18. Oh, man, Alvin. I mean, it's just hard. It's hard to play this guy. And I'm not saying I'm not going to play him. That's absolutely not the case. It's hard to play this guy knowing that he's just on a slump. He's really slumping this year. And it's like a tilt. And until he breaks it and is able to score that touchdown, I don't know when exactly we're going to see Alvin Kamara, come out of this slump. Because as of right now, his production, he gets 10-plus touches a week, 13, 11, 11, 13 in the last 3 weeks. But this last week was the most brutal. It's taking on San Francisco, saw very little work in the passing game because really they didn't need him. They had Drew Brees popping off for 6 touchdowns. Alvin Kamara, 0 touchdowns since week 3. Takes on Indianapolis, who's a decent defense. Maybe they don't need Alvin this week. And really, I'm starting him if he's on my team. And that's why I have him at 18. But it's concerning. Unless he gets a lot of touches in the passing game, I don't want to see another 10-point performance. I need my 16. I need the guy that I drafted in the top 3. Hopefully he can step up. He's my number 18. Moving on. We have James White as number 19 playing against the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, James White really turned it around the last couple of weeks. Obviously, Mr. Sonny Michel fallen out of favor. He's in a sunken place at this point. I don't even know how to explain it. But James White has been incredible in terms of, getting his production on. With the opportunity that he's been given, he's running away with it. Sure, this last week against the Kansas City Chiefs, only 9.9 points. Isn't beautiful, but gets it done in the passing game. It's exactly what we want to see. And I think going forward, considering the fact that they were down to Kansas City for a majority of that game, that's why the passing game got going. But against Cincinnati, when they take this lead and they mount this lead, I think James White's going to see a lot of work in the running game and then through the passing game. Also be a great contributor. He's my number 19 on the week. Moving on. We have number 20, Kareem Hunt. Now, Kareem Hunt scares me because if Kareem Hunt doesn't score a touchdown, he's not as good. And can I 100% guarantee that he's going to score a touchdown this week? Absolutely not. You can't guarantee anybody scores a touchdown this week, except for perhaps Chris Carson, because goodness, that's going to be a ridiculously good matchup. But as of right now, the way I see it, with a guy like Kareem Hunt and how good he has been in the last couple of weeks, can I 100% say that his production and his points will get there even without the touchdown? No. The guy has scored a touchdown each of the last 3 weeks. There's a reason why he's eclipsing those 10-point performances. He's even getting a lot of receptions. Kareem Hunt is a 100% flex play this week. But as of right now, even with the Arizona Cardinals matchup, it scares me. Because one of these weeks, he's going to only put up his normal 6 rushing attempts for 40 yards and then 4 great catches for, that's not even that bad of a performance. It's still 8 points. So to be honest, worst case scenario, Kareem Hunt sits at 20. And best case scenario, the guy pops off as a top 15 back once again. We'll see what happens, but I like the upside of it. Moving on. Joe Mixon, number 21. Joe Mixon had an incredible week. And Joe Mixon, to be honest, saved many fantasy owners. Despite how bad he was earlier in the season, if you held on to Joe Mixon since week 8, has been incredible. 15.7, 16.1, 16.8, 7.9, 15, and in this last week, 26.1 with a 146-yard performance. Joe Mixon's insane. Thank goodness we're seeing this Joe Mixon. Because, otherwise I was thinking to myself, where did he go? Now, by week 8, or by week 7, I thought, Joe Mixon, I'll see you next year as I draft you in the 4th round and I steal you. But now it's getting back to the point where Joe Mixon's, he has value. He does, 100%. But he plays the New England Patriots this week. Is that something that I want to play him in? Probably not. But if I have to, I get it done. I still think Joe Mixon's a very good running back, and the amount of touches he gets, it's undeniable. Maybe the Patriots, when they're going out and they're filming and they're recording signs, maybe they're afraid of this offense. Maybe they're afraid of taking this out. Maybe it's possible Joe Mixon has a good game. He's my number 21. Number 22, we have Phillip Lindsay. Phillip Lindsay continues to somehow, on a week that we don't anticipate it, get a rushing touchdown. But again, the guy sits at this point where unless he scores that rushing touchdown, he's a 7 to 8 point guy every week. Hopefully this week against Kansas City can bust one out. I'm expecting him to at least have a better performance this coming week than he did last time he played against Kansas City, as he only had 3.7 points. I expect a 10-point performance. That's why I sit him here at number 22. That's Phillip Lindsay. Moving on. Marlon Mack. Marlon Mack takes on the New Orleans Saints, and I think if I've seen anything, New Orleans defense has not been insanely good, and there are possibilities that a guy like Marlon Mack could actually have a pretty good week here, despite him missing some time and being pretty absent. But this last week came in, had himself a rushing touchdown, just picked up precisely kind of where he left off, just stealing touchdowns from this goal line offense, but didn't eclipse that 10-point performance yet. But as it currently stands, I wouldn't be surprised if Marlon Mack came out in New Orleans and somehow had a very good rushing day. I wouldn't be surprised, because he's a good runner. This is a good offensive line, and this is a pretty good offense. But again, it's a very sketchy matchup, and that's why I leave my number 23. Moving on, Miles Sanders at number 24. Not a surprise here. I like Miles Sanders a lot, actually, but it scares me that a guy like Boston Scott couldn't exist. Now, if Boston Scott doesn't get those receptions and he goes to Miles Sanders and he doesn't break out the big player, doesn't get that goal line touch, it's Miles Sanders that we're talking about, and he's probably sitting in the top 15 conversation this week. But because of the sketchiness of the backfield, he sits at 24. I still have a lot of confidence in him because Washington Redskins are not very good on defense. And I think Miles Sanders could be good this week. He's my number 24. All right. Let's move. What the heck happened? No. That's the wrong one. Oh, my goodness. I almost got dropped in the black hole. I was almost there, but I got myself out. Woo. All right. We have number 25 to 36, my RB3. Starting off at number 25, we have David Montgomery. David Montgomery plays against the Packers. The Packers are not good against the run. Hopefully, David Montgomery he's going to give him the ball a bunch. He's a good running back. Just the opportunity. Look, the Bears' offensive line is a pass block heavy offensive line, especially if you go back to last season and look at what PFF pretty much broke down on them. They had the second best pass blocking offensive line in the National Football League last year. Again, hopefully they can still run the ball. I know they're missing Kyle Long and all that kind of jazz, but this is a good offensive line. This is a good offense as of late. Hopefully they can take advantage of it with David Montgomery at 25. Moving on. Carlos Hyde at number 26 had himself a pretty good game this past week despite playing against that Denver Broncos defense. Takes on the Tennessee Titans. Shouldn't be an insanely easy matchup, but I expect Carlos Hyde to get some usage. And honestly be a pretty decent play. The guys underneath him could be better, but to be honest, the amount of touches that Carlos Hyde typically gets, and I'm anticipating him probably getting this week, is pretty decent. 16, 10, and 14, not bad. Obviously needs a touchdown to get that 10-plus points, and I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility when they get in the red zone. I know Deshaun Watson's been running the ball heavily, especially down in the goal line, but Carlos Hyde still capable of stealing one and having himself a pretty good week. Moving on. Patrick Laird. Patrick Laird, 10-point guy from last week, plays against the Giants this week. You cannot tell me that he's going to be stopped against the Giants. I don't expect that to happen. I expect Patrick Laird to actually be a pretty good play this week. And to be honest, if you haven't yet picked him up, pick him up. He could be a very good contributing flex option this week. Half PPR. The guy is a pretty good receiving back as well. And the only running back in that Miami backfield, he's my number 27. Moving on to number 28. We have Adrian Peterson. Despite the Eagles matchup, I expect Adrian Peterson to actually still be good. I've seen Adrian Peterson have good games against the Philadelphia Eagles where he breaks off big runs or has himself a pretty good day, and I expect him to probably do something similar. Now, I understand that Chris Thompson's in that backfield and there's no more Darius Guice, so I expect Adrian Peterson to probably get 15-plus touches, and I can't argue with that kind of opportunity comparatively to what is underneath him. I expect Adrian Peterson to probably still be the goal line back, and if this offense can move their way downfield similar to the way that Eli Manning did, Adrian Peterson could set up for himself for a pretty decent 10-point week here with the touchdown, 40 yards. Wouldn't be surprised. Moving on, Devonta Freeman at number 29. Devonta Freeman is going to need to find value in the passing game. Sure, he had himself a pretty good running game, but that was against the Carolina Panthers. Now we go to the opposite side of the spectrum where it's a far more difficult matchup, and we have to take on the 49ers defense. Devonta Freeman is going to struggle, and I expect him to have to get work in the passing game in order to be relevant. Otherwise, he sits on my bench for this week in the uncertainty that he could potentially just be completely shut out on the ground because of just how good that defense is in general. But we'll see how that goes. Moving on. Number 31 is Boston Scott. Now, my whole thought process is both of these running backs are going to be used, whether that's Boston Scott and or Miles Sanders. And if they're going to use them at their similar rate, and they're both going to be pretty decent running backs, and they're both going to split carries, they're both going to be decent. That's why I have Miles Sanders at 24, and that's why I have Boston Scott at number 31, because I do think I have a thought process that potentially they just go with the two-back set. They run them both, and they both give him about 12 touches apiece, and they could both have really good games against Washington, because really what Aaron Jones did against that defense isn't a surprise and isn't something new. It could potentially happen once again this week, so I think Boston Scott not a bad pickup and play. I did skip LeSean McCoy, so let's go to LeSean McCoy really quickly. I don't want to do that because I did that to Rashad Penny last week. Rashad Penny disappeared, and I don't want LeSean McCoy to disappear. So here's the thing about LeSean McCoy. In comparison to the other options, I guess you want to call them, in that Kansas City offense, I don't really trust anybody there. Spencer Ware got like a couple touches. We had ourselves, a little bit of Darwin Thompson. We saw very little bit of LeSean McCoy this past week. Is there a possibility that LeSean McCoy could be decent this week? Sure, but he has to score a touchdown. Like, has to. It's actually a must. If he doesn't score a touchdown, I don't trust it at all. So in that vein, is there a possibility that I even want to throw him out there, that I want to throw him into the lineup? Let me go and give a little peek here. Let's look at what LeSean McCoy has been working with in terms of touches. I mean, in terms of touches, he had the most, he had his most rushing attempts since week 7 last week. So that's a pretty big difference. A 7 weeks, slump that he had. Last time he played against Denver the last time he played against Denver was the most rushing attempts he had seen this season. 12 rushes for 64 yards. Not a bad day, to be honest. Last week, 11 rushing attempts, and I think as the season progresses, they're going to need him more and more. There's no Darrell Williams. Damian Williams could come back. If Damian Williams does come back, he takes this spot at number 30. But LeSean McCoy is the best of the best of that group right now. So he sits at number 30. All right, moving on to number 32, like we talked about Boston Scott already. Number 32 is Kenyan Drake, and Kenyan Drake's quite a disappointment. And David Johnson somehow is still in that lineup, stealing touchdowns in the passing game in the fourth quarter. How? I don't get it. But Kenyan Drake, you're still the starting running back of this team. You take on the Browns, not a bad matchup. We saw Joe Mixon run all over them. Maybe Kenyan Drake can get some work in the passing game, get some explosive plays on the ground, be a decent running back. He's my number 32. Moving on to number 33, Chris Thompson. 8 targets, 7 receptions, whatever the hell amount of yards, 30-something amount, 38, I think. Chris Thompson could be a very good receiving back this week against the Eagles. He has been in the past, and he could probably be a third down back and potentially even be a 3-down back if they wanted him to be. I know they want to leave him on a pitch count or something because he's coming off of an injury, but Chris Thompson could really be a good contributor this week, especially in a full PPR. I think he's a pretty good pickup if you're looking for something like that. Moving on. Bo Scarborough is my number 34 playing against Tampa Bay. Not an easy matchup and not something that I typically want to play, but Bo Scarborough, despite difficult matchups, has actually been pretty decent this year. He's a bigger back. He's an Alabama kid that is just going to run over people. And that's the certainty as of right now. But my internet's like literally just trashed itself. I can't even look up Bo Scarborough stats anymore. But as of right now, Bo Scarborough at 34, pretty confident in him as a potential hopeful play. We'll see. The guys here at like 34, 35, and 36, they're kind of sketchy. Like Benny Snell at this moment in time. Benny Snell takes on the Buffalo Bills. At times, this defense can't stop the run. But to be honest, Benny Snell did not look good at all last week. And I'm worried that maybe Jalen Samuels is going to take the starting spot now. Is that a possibility? Sure. Latavius Murray. Yeah, Alvin Kamara hasn't looked good. Latavius Murray's been stealing rushing touchdowns, and he's getting a lot of touches in the goal line, red zone area. Is Latavius Murray a guy that could potentially step up, get a 12-point week? Yes, absolutely. It's always possible. That's why they sit here. And that's who I wanted to put at the back end of my top 36. I want to thank everybody for watching. I appreciate you guys spending your time today watching today's video. If you didn't yet already, click that like button, click the subscribe button, join the community. And until tomorrow, we'll be talking about wide receivers on Wednesday. Thank you, everybody, again. And I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.